Americans Samurai, the 442nd Infantry, most decorated unit of World War II by the Fat Electrician.
This is my third attempt in the last year at making this video, but it's one of those ones that you have to get right.
Makes sense.
Today we're talking about America's Samurai, the Nisei, the second generation Japanese Americans that comprise the 442nd Infantry Regiment and the 100th Infantry Battalion, aka the Purple Heart Battalion. Ladies and gentlemen, in World War II, America did what is, in my opinion, one of the most disgusting things that the American government has ever done. They signed an executive order suspending all of the constitutional rights of Japanese Americans and then forced over 120,000 American citizens into an internment camp for the duration of World War II for no other reason than they had Japanese ancestry.
Thank you, Fat Electrician. Thank you, someone else, for saying this is unacceptable. This is not something we should, one, forget, but two, is also unacceptable. I feel like I've literally been screeching into the void about Japanese internment camps for like years at this point. Just look, I honestly appreciate that someone else has said the thing out loud, that this was kind of a bad idea. Obviously, you look at contextually, right? But like even contextually, right? Come on now.
Despite that, the sons of these Japanese Americans not only volunteered to fight for America in World War II, they demanded and petitioned for the opportunity to do so. And not only did they fight, they became one of the most effective and decorated combat units in American history. And we're gonna get into it right after a word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by Sundays. It's food for dogs. Isn't that right, Mushu? All right, okay. Calm down. Anyways, Sundays for Dogs is dog food that's made with a bunch of human ingredients like, actual meat and not, ground up cartilage and pig dicks. The food actually looks different. Like, it actually looks like beef jerky. It doesn't smell like a bunch of dehydrated dog food. It's air dried. It's made here in America. Mushu loves it, and it's pretty much the only thing he'll eat now.
Nice.
It's like all the other fancy dog foods with none of the downsides, right? You don't have to open a can every time you go to feed your dog. You don't have to stick this shit inside your refrigerator, and you can get it as a subscription service, so it just keeps showing up to your house, because at least for me, every time I had dog food on my grocery shopping list, I would always forget, then I had to make a trip just for dog food. So it's nice to have it just show up at the house. So if you want to give Sundays a try, I'm gonna have a link and a discount code down below. Let's get back to the video.
I'm gonna be honest. I give it a 10. I think for what it was flush with the rest of the video. I think that the banner ads, like, it's taking me a bit to adjust to them. I think mostly, like, how I do react content where I actually pause and I actually talk about whatever I'm talking about. Excuse me. Oh my God. I'm so sorry about that. You know how I'm like pausing and I do things, right? And people don't like it. I don't really see people do banner ads, and I think it's similar. But justifying, one, that it's minimalized screen space, two, that it's jam-packed with information, and three, I think it's unique and a lot of people could be using a banner ad format. Audio, visuals, everything was relevant with the video. Target demographic made sense, right? Yeah, I'd give this a 10. I don't know what else I could expect from it.
All right, our story begins on December 7th, 1941, when the Imperial Japanese attack America at Pearl Harbor. Okay, everybody knows what the attack on Pearl Harbor is, but what almost nobody knows about is the Ni Hao incident that happened directly after the attack on Pearl Harbor that would change the course of American history. During the second wave of the attack at Pearl Harbor, America was able to get some of their fighter planes up in the air and begin fighting back. Some of these American fighter planes were obviously shooting at the Japanese fighter planes, and one of these Japanese Zeros ends up getting shot in its fuel tank and leaks out a bunch of its fuel. The Imperial Japanese pilot Suganori Nishikaichi does the only thing he can do in that situation. He makes an emergency landing on what he believes to be a small uninhabited Hawaiian island known as Ni Hao. However, he was incorrect. The island actually had 135 inhabitants, 133 of which were native Hawaiians, and then there was one Japanese couple, Yoshi and Irene Horata. Now, Ni Hao is like 140 miles away from Pearl Harbor, so the residents of the island had no idea that Japan was actually attacking America. So when he first made this emergency landing, everybody was happy to help this guy. They thought he was just, a pilot from a friendly country that needed their help. Then within a couple of hours, word had reached Ni Hao that America was under attack by the Japanese, at which point the Hawaiians did the appropriate thing. They took him as their prisoner, took away his guns, locked him up, and they were going to hold him for the American government to come and get him.
All right,
Sure.
let me ask you this one time. What master do you serve? What master do I serve? What am I supposed to say, Jesus?
But for whatever reason, Yoshi and Irene decided that they were sympathetic towards this Japanese pilot, so much so that they were actually going to help him break out of jail, arm him, and try to help him escape.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
This plan would ultimately be thwarted by the Hawaiians, primarily a man by the name of Ben Kanahele, who was a World War I veteran and rancher. When Ben Kanahele went to stop Shugenori from escaping, Shugenori shot him 3 times, at which point Ben Kanahele proceeds to pick Shugenori up and throw him at a stone wall. His wife then bashes him in the head with a rock while Ben pulls out his hunting knife and slits his throat, which I cannot stress to you enough is the most Polynesian American shit I have ever heard in my entire life. Homie gets shot 3 times, then proceeds to pick up the armed gunman and throw him at a wall like he's the Incredible Hulk. After that, Yoshi, the Japanese man that was trying to help him escape, would also wind up dead, and his wife Irene would end up being incarcerated for the rest of World War II. So Ben Kanahele saves the day. Hooray, that's good. Bad news, this is a really, really bad look for pretty much all Japanese Americans, right? There was 2 Japanese Americans present, and they elected to side with the Imperial Japanese that were attacking America. And this is why
this is going to lead into the decisions, that this is going to have repercussions and ramifications going into the decision-making process for the Japanese internment camps.
Ends up being one of the main catalysts and excuses for the American government discriminating against American citizens that had Japanese ancestry. By January 1942, the Hawaiian National Guard released all of its soldiers that had Japanese ancestry and basically just kicked them out of the army, which is kind of a big deal because at this point in time, like 40% of the Hawaiian population actually had Japanese ancestry. Then by February 19th, 1942, FDR would sign Executive Order 9066, which effectively suspended all of the constitutional rights of any Japanese American, ordered them to sell their homes, sell their businesses for a much lower value than they were actually worth, and then they were supposed to report to an internment camp for the duration of World War II.
From what I understand, did George Takei, he himself or members of his family, did they not have to go through this? I don't think I've heard a lot of high-profile celebrities, public figures, etc. I don't think I've heard a lot of them talk about it. From what I understand, George Takei, either firsthand or secondhand, does have experience with this.
Single pen stroke, 120,000 American citizens lost all of their constitutional rights and went from being a full-fledged American to a prisoner like that. Now, like I already said, I think that is one of the most disgusting things the American government has ever done. However, I do have to get kind of sidetracked because I have a crazy conspiracy theory about this, and it's going to get weird, so bear with me.
I'm ready.
I'm going to get real weird with it. Meanwhile, block the wind. I'm going to roast this bone.
Jesus Christ.
I think that this inspired Star Wars, and just hear me out. The Jedi and the Sith, you know, the guys with the lightsabers are clearly inspired by samurai. You know, they have the robes, they have the same garb, they have swords, that's their primary weapon. They're just space samurai, that's all it is. You've got the Jedi, which are the good ones, and then you've got the Sith, which are the bad ones, similar to Japanese people. You've got the Imperial Japanese, which are the bad ones, and then you have the American Japanese, which are the good ones. But then Chancellor Palpatine comes along. He is the leader of the Republic, the president, so to speak. Also worth noting, he's an elderly guy that nobody ever sees standing up. He's always sitting down.
I'm too weak. Oh, don't kill me.
And he issues...
We see him standing. We see him walking. Don't get me wrong. I'm getting nitpicky here. We do see him walk in the prequels. Absolutely. We see him walk when Padme shows up after, actually getting to Coruscant, talking to Chancellor Valorum, right? Like, he actually walks out to greet him. I understand where he's going with this, and I think you might be able to argue a certain percentage of Palpatine's screen time is sitting down. It's my tism sticking out here, though. Like, I get what he's getting at. I think there's some nuance here, though.
In order to get rid of all the Jedi, he gets rid of all the good guys, just like that. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Chubby Electron guy's reaching too far. He's lost his mind. Potentially, okay? But here's the linchpin in the entire argument, right? When Emperor Palpatine got rid of the Jedi, he got rid of the good guys, he executed Order 66. When FDR got rid of all the Japanese Americans, he signed Executive Order 9066. I mean, what the fuck are the odds, right?
They're on to me, dude. Those guys are sharp as nails up there. You can't put anything past them.
Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. Anyways.
No, so I think that, I think he's making, so most importantly, I do think he's making an argument in good faith. Is it a necessarily a 1-to-1? No. Well, isn't necessarily 1-to-1. I think there's differences there. I think when you look at the Jedi, yes, it's Space Samurai, right? From what I understand, Star Wars was a commentary on a number of things, as far as I'm aware, from George Lucas. If I remember correctly, George Lucas was very anti, was it Vietnam? And Star Wars is also a commentary on authoritarianism, right? Palpatine, this is how democracy dies, with thunderous applause, right? Palpatine goes from some random senator to supreme chancellor to maintaining his term long after it's expired. And that was a plot point in episode 3, right? Obi-Wan saying he's, literally uneasy. The whole situation makes him uneasy, and thus using emergency powers to create the first galactic empire, right? I think you'd have to talk to Lucas. There's absolutely undeniable Japanese influence. Obi-Wan, right? And Obi. We were literally talking about L5R for like 30 minutes before I actually started this, right? Japanese themed, right? But yeah, like the Obi is a part of a kimono, right? I think it's the belt specifically. So there is undeniable Japanese influence. I think that there is... I think that there's a connection here. I don't think that he's reaching. I think this is being made in good faith. And I think it's something you would honestly really have to kind of delve into. You'd have to delve into Lucas's his philosophy. You'd have to delve into the influences that inspired him to do it. And you have to deal with a story he's trying to tell, right? Where commonly people will say, and I've said this in the past, where it's just a space opera. To which I will admit that I am wrong on understanding that George Lucas has said that people will say it's a space opera, but it's not, right? So, as it turns out, I can be wrong. Fat Electrician might be wrong in certain aspects, but I think this is an argument being made in good faith.
120,000 Japanese American citizens end up getting thrown in concentration camps inside of America. Shitty, awful, horrible, but it's what happened. In Hawaii, however, things went a little bit different because a significant portion of the Hawaiian population was Japanese, and they couldn't throw all of them in a concentration camp. Otherwise, it would crash the entire Hawaiian economy. So a lot of them got to kind of live borderline normal lives. So a lot of the Japanese Americans that were previously serving in the National Guard that got released from duty end up forming what they called the Varsity Victory Volunteers, and they petitioned the Hawaiian governor, and they were like, hey, look, I understand I have a Japanese ancestry, but I'm not Japanese. I'm an American. I understand you're not going to let me fight and have a gun, but I still want to help with this war effort any way I can because this is my home and I want to fight for it. And the Hawaiian governor ends up letting them form this volunteer group. And essentially, they just start doing any manual labor jobs that they can do that's going to help with the war effort. They're stringing out concertina wire. They're digging ditches. They're pouring roads. They're pouring airstrips. They're doing anything and everything that gets asked of them. And this goes on for months. And then by June of 1942, the government's like, okay, I get it. You guys are loyal to America. We're going to go ahead. We're going to bring you back into the army, but you're going to be in a segregated all Japanese unit being led by white officers. You're going to be known as the 100th Infantry Battalion.
I think that this was a good way to dive into a very serious and, in my opinion, a controversial, depending on who you talk to, subject. Obviously, no, I don't think anybody, reasonably so, can say, yeah, these actions were kind of dumb. Like they were kind of not okay. Let's put it that way. To which, chat, understanding why they did it, it does not make such an action, not a horrible betrayal. And I think that that's the key here. I think that's the key of education, right? You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with Fat Electrician. You don't have to agree with really anybody, right? You are your own individual. You can intake the information. You can intake it, analyze it, acknowledge it, and then, retain it, right? You can learn it and then come to your own educated conclusion. I think that understanding how things like this happen rather than forgetting them or being a complete history revisionist is important, right? I'm not happy that we had U.S. concentration camps. I'm not happy that Shira Ishii and the entirety of Unit 731 got off effectively scot-free. What do I do about that? There's no call to action here. This is the information. You may agree with it. You may disagree with it. You may feel apathetic on it. But at the very least, you're able to intake it, and the information is there for people to understand, to learn, and ideally to prevent this from happening again. There was a tweet recently about Fat Electrician made a tweet recently. I can't pull it up at the moment because I don't remember what it was for. But he did do a response to somebody. And he said in it something along the lines of, don't let your pursuit of perfection impede progress. And even then, even if I have points I disagree with, even if he disagrees with me, like, I think there's wisdom in that. My pursuit of perfection, let's say, is that eventually, yes, humans can come together around a common table. We can talk about things. We can leave notions of war and conflict behind. But do I impede progress for the sake of that perfection if we need to go through painful lessons over and over and over and over and over and over and over again to finally, get our stuff together and to actually make things happen? Reasonably so, yes. You want to do it first try, measure twice, cut once, right? Japanese proverb, right? But that's not how people work. And there's a lot of deep scars. There's a lot of things that go into that, where I do agree with that sentiment that focusing on the perfection aspect will impede progress. Now, then we get into means justify the end versus ends justifying the means, and there's two dueling philosophies there. I inherently will disagree with it, and you will not hear me ever agree with Japanese citizens losing their rights this way. I think that was abhorrent. I think that was unnecessary. I think that was cruel. And you will also not hear me try to be history revisionist. Yes, we'll talk about the things. It will be uncomfortable to talk about the things, but learning the things, understanding the things can help make it so that it doesn't have to happen again. And if we have to live painful lesson over and over again, that's unfortunately just reality. Eventually we will hit a day where it's not going to be a concern. But all of us need to work together to talk to each other again, to be able to professionally disagree with each other, to be able to not take everything that even remotely conflicts with our worldview as a personal attack, right? There's a lot of progress we need to make to get to points like this. So just wanted to aside that, because I think that he did have a point there. And as much as it conflicts with my own philosophy of we should be seeking perfection, I think that there's still wisdom in that. So I do want to actually personally thank him for that. I thought that it made me think for a little bit, and it was something that I feel a lot of people could take some inspiration and wisdom from.
So they take 1,500 of these young Japanese-American men that are second-generation Americans, also known as Nisei, and they ship them off to Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, which is completely redundant because all of them had already been in the Hawaiian National Guard, and they'd already gone through Army basic training, but that's where they send them to go through it again, and they do it.
Done, drill sergeant!
I love that.
Why did you put that weapon together so quickly, Go?
You tell me to, drill sergeant.
I hadn't seen that. I actually haven't seen Forrest Gump. I've seen bits and pieces of it.
And while they're there, the Nisei continue to prove that they are 1,000% committed to America, despite the fact that America has given them every reason to not be. And they prove it not with just their general dedication to the task, but while they're actually there, the Army secretly sends in psychologists inside of their command structure to evaluate them, to see if they're lying, to see if they're actually dedicated to America. And all of the psychologists are like, yeah, these guys are 100% legit. They mean it when they say they're here to fight for America. On top of that, they go above and beyond when 5 Nisei end up getting awarded the Soldier's Medal because there was some civilians that went out on a frozen lake and the ice shattered and they were going to drown, and these young Nisei went out and saved these civilians. In addition to that, 26 of them volunteered to go be bait for attack dogs when America was trying to train dogs to be able to sniff out Japanese people for the Pacific Theater. They were literally doing anything and everything that was asked of them, regardless of how shitty of a job it was. And somewhere along the way, it becomes clear to the chain of command, like, okay, these guys are legit. We're going to give them guns and we're going to send them off into combat, but we're going to make sure that we send them off into the European theater. We're not going to send them into the Japanese theater for a multitude of reasons. One, if they get caught as Japanese Americans fighting against Japan, the Japanese are going to absolutely torture them to death, and it's going to be horrible. So A, we're going to protect them in that fashion, but B, we also don't want Japanese Americans really participating in the Pacific theater in a combat role, because if the American soldiers that aren't Japanese get accustomed to seeing Japanese guys in an American uniform, eventually the Japanese could figure out like, hey, we're going to start taking uniforms off of dead GIs, we're going to dress up as Americans, infiltrate their ranks, and then wreak havoc behind friendly lines.
Just be honest right now. How confident are we then we're gonna be able to know who's who, right? Like, it's gonna be the Spider-Man meme, like.
So at this point,
No, he's absolutely correct. And I think that as much as you could argue, sure, maybe that's profiling, maybe that's, well, they should just go out, this should be expected of them. It's not necessarily that your concern is with the Nisei. It's not necessarily that your concern is with, you know, the people on your side. It's that now it is open information that you have Nisei fighting for the American, you know, for the military, right? So now what happens if you have, I don't know, some Japanese units get a hold of a shipment of American uniforms, or they raid some bases and steal some uniforms. Maybe they modify the name tags a little bit to sound a little legit. And now you have a problem to contend with because now it gets harder to determine friend or foe, right? And that becomes an issue. I mean, I guess there might also be the psychological aspect of it because Japanese ancestry, you know, right? Hailing from Japan, especially, you know, 1 to 2 generations removed, conflict there. I think that there's a lot of stressors that do get put on there. And I think that there are valid reasons to withhold. As I said, not necessarily faulting the Nisei, but because of situations that could put them into predicaments that are going to be very hard to deal with.
they send him off to Camp Shelby, Mississippi for advanced infantry training, and then FDR announces that he's going to form an even larger all-Japanese Nisei regiment, the 442nd. Now, the American government is hoping to get 4,500 volunteers to be in the 442nd Infantry Regiment, which is kind of a big ask from a community of people that you've just taken all of their civil rights away and then thrown them in a prison. And not only do they end up getting 4,500 volunteers, they get over 10,000, which is absolutely insane because I'm gonna tell you right now, if you incarcerated my entire family for no other reason than the color of their skin and then asked me to go fight in a world war for you, I would probably tell you to go fuck yourself. So all 10,000 of these dudes are far bigger men than me. Speaking of bigger men than me, one of the...
So imagine it this way, though. Imagine you are, I don't know, from small town Iowa. Imagine if your family ended up, working in, quote unquote, lesser jobs, right? Anyone who is not a banker, anyone who's not customer service, you're a farmer, you're an automotive tech, you do these manual labor jobs, you do construction, you just don't have rights tomorrow. And then imagining these same people saying, look, we got the short end of the stick here, but we'll help you unfuck your mess, right? That takes a lot of integrity. That takes a lot of balls, is all I'm going to say.
Volunteers is a young man by the name of Daniel Inouye, who is currently in med school trying to be a doctor. When Pearl Harbor happened, he ran to the nearest Blue Cross aid station and started working around the clock treating the wounded. And he's been volunteering at aid stations and hospitals for months while also going to med school ever since Pearl Harbor happened. So when he goes to the draft board tells him, like, no, you're too valuable where you're at. You're going to go off and become a doctor. On top of that, you're already doing a bunch of work for us stateside. We don't want to send you off to combat. So he's like, okay, I'll be right back. He leaves, drops out of med school, tells the hospital he's not coming back to help anymore, and then goes back to the draft board and is like, I just quit my job and I dropped out of med school. Fucking send me. So they end up sending him, and he ships off with the rest of the 442nd Infantry Regiment for basic training 2 days later. While the 442nd ship off to get their training started, the 100th Infantry Battalion is finishing up their advanced training at Camp Shelby, Mississippi. They are then sent off to North Africa, and they get there in September of 1943. So they land in Oran, which is a major port city in Algeria, and from there they get attached to the 34th Infantry Division, aka the Red Bulls, in particular the 133rd Infantry Regiment, aka the Iron Men, which, cool part, that's my old unit. Not so cool part, the commander is kind of a dickhead because when he has his greeting speech to the 100th Infantry Battalion, he openly refers to them as the guinea pigs from Pearl Harbor. And not that I'm trying to defend Commander Mark Clark for calling them guinea pigs, I'm absolutely not, but to put it into a little bit of context, a lot of people have a lot of doubts that the Nisei soldiers are going to be effective on the battlefield, okay? The average Nisei soldier at this point in time was between 5'4" and 5'6" and weighed somewhere between 120 and 140 pounds, and they just got attached to the 34th Infantry Division, which is based out of the Midwest, okay? The 34th Infantry Division, by and large today, but especially back then, was almost nothing but 185-pound corn-fed white boys with machine guns that grew up on a farm. So they're looking at these dudes with a smaller stature like, what do you guys really think you're going to do on this battlefield? Why are you even here?
So here's this question, and I'm going to ask this as a good faith question. So obviously, I would argue the military in a lot of factors is going to be more direct in a lot of ways, right? Especially when you talk about drill sergeant status, right? I mean, how many times have drill sergeants called people names, called people things? But it's meant to harden them a little bit, right? My question comes down to, from a military perspective, especially for the time period, I guess, is this going to be in rational and reasonable bounds for, you know, some kind of like name calling or like jabs, etc.? I ask because I'm civilian. I'm not military. I know that military do have some different standards with how people talk to them, right? Like, I'm assuming you could be in your unit, you could be with people you serve with, and they'll be able to call you every single name under the sun. And it's just like, it's just Robbie, right? Like, that's the kind of angle I'm going with here. And I think Fat Electrician has also addressed this in a way that, like, yeah, you have a bunch of, white boys, corn-fed, born and bred on a farm, who are now in the military, and it's definitely different. Not that reasonably, and I think this is a reasonable, excuse. Not that we can excuse any sort of racial stereotyping. I just ask because I wonder if this is part of that military crudeness and directness, as I'll call it. And I'm asking this in a good faith way to try to kind of understand the mentality a little bit more.
Look at that. He's making me cry.
If the Nisei want respect, they're going to have to prove themselves. And from the second they step foot in combat, that's exactly what they did, because they started kicking ass right outside of Salerno, Italy, when they first saw combat. For their first week of combat, they drove the Germans back 15 miles per day,
Yikes.
Every single day. These guys were fearless on the battlefield. In a matter of a couple of months,
Wow.
they had completely changed the opinions of absolutely everybody that encountered them. Mark Clark, the same commander that referred to them as guinea pigs, sent a note up the chain of command saying, hey, when that 442nd Infantry regiment's done training, I want them too. These Nisei fighters are fucking awesome. When the Des Moines Register, the biggest newspaper back home in Iowa, wrote an article being critical of the Nisei being attached to the 34th Infantry Division, the members of the 34th Infantry Division wrote a letter to their editor. And I quote, "We're Iowa boys of the 34th Division. We have fought side by side with the boys of Japanese descent. We know plenty of folks that call themselves Americans that have done much less to prove they give a hang about their country. There have been times when these Japanese, as you call them, have saved many lives only because they have proven themselves better Americans than some that were not of Japanese descent."
That is such a burn. Can you imagine I'm sure it might happen, right? Somebody does a hit piece on the military, does a hit piece on some unit or something like that, some policy, and you have like actual people who serve with them from the military absolutely just serving them like this. Ooh, that is savage. Oh, that is beautiful to witness. That's that camaraderie.
So not only are the Nisei of the 100th Infantry beating the Nazis, they're also winning over hearts and minds left and right, and they're just getting warmed up.
Wow, destroy.
All right, by January of 1944, the 100th and the rest of the Allied forces have advanced through North Africa, and they have come up to the German Gustav Line. The Gustav Line is effectively the line in the sand that Germany has drawn, where they are not going to let the Allied forces advance past this point. It is heavily fortified, they have the high ground, they have all the advantages, and they are going to fight tooth and nail to not let Allied forces penetrate through this line into Europe. And one of the most vital areas of the Gustav Line is where the 100th Infantry is at. It's at Monte Cassino. Cassino is a small town, and then above it, on a humongous hill overlooking the town, is an old monastery that the Germans have turned into a massive fortress. And not only that, they went and chopped down all the trees on the hills and the ground in front of the monastery, knocked down all the buildings, so there's absolutely nothing to provide cover or concealment in case they assault. So you're pretty much running through an open field uphill into German machine gun fire if you try to take this position. And
I wonder if there, like we just mentioned, no man's land. I wonder if there's some German World War I tactics done to this, or if this is just like the best way of doing it, right? Like the concept of, all these styles from around the world that hold two swords kind of move in same ways. Were they inspired by each other? Did they talk to each other? Or is there only so many ways you can move your body, right? Was this inspired by World War I no man's land trench warfare? Or is it just, this just makes sense for sight lines? Sometimes Occam's razor, right? The simplest solution is probably the solution.
It's exactly what America's going to do anyways, because it's the only option. And because the 100th Infantry, which I'm now going to refer to by their nickname, the One Puka Puka, because it's easier for me to say, has developed a reputation for being both fearless and willing to take on any challenge, they are selected to lead the first assault on Monte Cassino. January 17th, 1944 at midnight, Alpha and Charlie Company of the One Puka Puka are going to take off, advance up this hill. They fight all the way up this hill and make it to the outer stone walls of this monastery, where they get pinned down and they continue to fight all night long. They're taking heavy casualties, they're running out of ammunition. It is straight up not a good time. They need more ammo. But now it's broad daylight out, so they're gonna have to send in reinforcements. So they send in Bravo Company of the One Puka Puka. But if they go out in broad daylight up this hill with no cover, they're gonna get absolutely mowed down. So they drop a bunch of smoke. Bravo Company starts advancing through the smoke, and then the wind shifts and blows all the smoke away, and they get just utterly destroyed. Of the 187 men of Bravo Company, only 14 of them end up making it to the wall. After taking that many casualties and running out of ammunition and having fought all night already, they are finally ordered to withdraw. A couple of weeks later, the Allied forces launch another major attack on Monte Cassino and the Gustav Line. This time, the One Puka Puka is ordered to take Castle Hill, a neighboring hill to the monastery that's of vital importance to be able to cut off support. The Nisei actually managed to fight their way up the hill and take the top of the hill, and they managed to hold it for 4 straight days, fighting their asses off. But then eventually the flanks of the 34th Infantry end up collapsing, and they're about to get completely surrounded and stuck on top of this hill, at which point they are ordered to withdraw again. By this point,
sorry about that. No, that especially with, you know, terrain like that, where that is going to be the point of interest. Sure, absolutely, you can be entrenched in that. That can give you a lot of advantage. But if the enemy can break through, suddenly you have the same advantages and disadvantages that you have, especially if you can get cut off. That is going to be an interesting battle of attrition.
The 100th Infantry Battalion has lost 50% of their men, and they are ordered to the rear, where they can recuperate and pick up reinforcements to replenish their ranks. People start referring to them as the Purple Heart Battalion and the Little Men of Iron, a play on the 133rd Infantry Regiment's Iron Men nickname. After a brief recuperation, they are then sent to a different spot on the Gustav Line near Anzio, and this spot of the line is essentially World War I-esque warfare. Each team has their trench, and there's just no man's land in between. For 2 months straight, all they do is sit inside their trenches and their foxholes. They fight all night and they sleep all day. The One Puka Puka starts referring to it as Dracula days. They sleep during the day, they draw blood at night. While the One Puka Puka is there, there is a third major attack on Monte Cassino by other Allied forces that also fails. At this point, the chain of command's getting restless, they're pissed, they need to break through the German Gustav Line, and eventually they come to the conclusion, fuck it, we're just gonna pick a point where we're gonna attack, and we're gonna hit that singular point along the line with absolutely everything we've got. The problem is, the Germans have massive tank units in the area too, and they need to know where those tank units are, because if they decide to attack at a singular point, and that's the point where there's a bunch of German tanks, it's not gonna go that great for the Allied forces. So they need to figure this out, otherwise this is gonna be a humongous gamble. At this point, a member of the One Puka Puka steps forward and goes to the chain of command because he's got an idea, and that man is Lieutenant Young Oak Kim. And Young Oak Kim is already a complete badass. He's already earned a Silver Star and a Purple Heart, and he's coming to the chain of command with this crazy idea. But what's most interesting about Young Oak Kim is he's one of the very few people in the One Puka Puka that's not Japanese. And that's
so I guess the name is kind of confusing me. I'm trying to figure out what Puka Puka is, because it's a combination of English and Japanese. Because if I looked at this and say Japanese in context, I would assume one Puka Puka, right? One being 2 syllables, 2 symbols. But if it's one Puka Puka, I'm definitely missing some context here for the name.
Because he's an officer, and typically the officers were white men, but in Young Oak Kim's case, he was Korean. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, the racial tensions between Japanese people and Koreans during World War II was pretty high, considering the Japanese had invaded Korea and were committing atrocities there. Because of this, prior to deploying with the One Puka Puka, the chain of command pulled Young Oak Kim aside, and they were like, hey, we understand that Japan is invading Korea, there's racial tensions between Japanese and Korean people. If you want, we can give you different orders and have you attached to a different unit, to which Young Oak Kim replied, and I quote, There are no Japanese nor Koreans here. We're Americans, and we're fighting for the same cause. So Young-O Kim is just a complete badass, and he goes to the chain of command, and he's like, look, you need somebody to go behind enemy lines and figure out where these tank units are. Here's my plan. You guys keep attacking at night with these major formations. It's obvious. They know we're coming at night. Why don't you send me and one other guy behind enemy lines in broad daylight? I will sneak back there. I will capture a German soldier, drag him back. We can interrogate him and figure out where these tank units are, and then we'll know where to attack.
you know, I was expecting, what is it? Rick and Morty, you son of a bitch, I'm in. That's what I was expecting here.
You serious?
Okay, now right out of the gate, that's kind of a stupid idea, right? You're really gonna go behind no man's land, capture an enemy soldier, drag him back without getting caught and killed, but the Allied forces are desperate, so they're like, you know what? It might work, and if it works, it's not that stupid. They give him the green light, and he sets off to do it. May 16th, Lieutenant Kim and PFC Irving Akahoshi crawl through no man's land through an open wheat field in broad daylight, crawl all the way behind enemy lines where they find a German unit that had been up all night manning their machine guns. They then stalk them further behind enemy lines and watch them as they eat dinner, breakfast, whatever they're eating at this point in time. Watch them eat and then fall asleep. And then when two dudes go to, you know, be the guards, they stalk them, and then they end up sitting there and waiting till they fall asleep, and they wake them up by shoving their guns in their mouths so they can't scream. Kim and Akahoshi then take their two German prisoners, smuggle them back through no man's land, behind friendly lines, turn the prisoners over, they get interrogated, they gather the intel as to where the German tank units are, and define the battle plans for the entire Allied advance. 48 hours later, after setting off on his mission, the Allied forces launched their attack in Monte Cassino Falls on May 18th. Lieutenant Young-O Kim is then awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award in the American military. And as he's getting that pinned on his chest, Commander Mark Clark looks down and sees his first lieutenant rank, and then points over to a captain nearby and is like, you, Mayor. Captain approaches, he rips the captain rank off of this guy and pins Lieutenant Young-O Kim as a captain as well. Cutting back to the rest of the One Puka Puka over at Anzio, they also coordinated the attack with the fourth battle of Monte Cassino, so that if Monte Cassino fell, they were also going to launch their offensive, hopefully driving the Germans back, so that they broke the Gustav line in two locations. That way, they could advance forward and in and either crush the Germans in the middle, or the Germans would be forced to retreat. And that's exactly what ended up happening. And not only that, the One Puka Puka was the lead element of the Anzio breakout. So now the Allied forces are chasing the Germans as they advance towards Rome, and the One Puka Puka is out front. And as they get near Rome, they're like 15 miles outside of Rome. They are going to be the first Americans to set foot in a major European capital as the Allied forces capture it. They are ordered to stand down as they peel off the side of the road and just kind of hang out in the ditch, and they don't know what's going on. And then other American units start catching up, and then they keep marching, and they keep marching into Rome. And now the One Puka Puka is not the first into Rome, and it dawns on them, they pulled us off to the side because they didn't want a bunch of Japanese dudes being the first Americans to capture a major European capital.
Disgusting.
They never even got to set foot in Rome. They were ordered to go link up with the new Nisei unit, the 442nd Infantry Regiment, and they would be absorbed into that unit now instead. From here, the One Puka Puka still kind of retained its identity as the 100th Infantry Battalion, but they are just now one of 3 battalions inside of the 442nd Infantry Regiment. And their new unit slogan is one of the best and most famous slogans in military history: go for broke, which is a Hawaiian slang term that basically means I'm going all in. I'm pushing all my chips into the table, because that's exactly how these guys felt. They're all in this shitty situation where their former homeland is attacking them and their new home seemingly doesn't want them. So they're picking their side and they're going all in. From here, the 442nd is ordered to head north and take over a town called Suvareto. And this is going to be the first major military operation that they get to conduct by themselves. This is the ultimate point that they get to prove themselves, where they can say, we did that alone and nobody else helped. And they do it with surgical precision. They end up taking the 2nd and 3rd battalions of the 442nd Infantry Regiment, and they attack the front of the town, and then they send the 1st Battalion, the One Puka Puka, around the backside to flank their retreat. Now, 2nd and 3rd Battalion, this is the first time they've seen combat. These guys are green. They just got out of training. So the Germans actually end up launching a semi-successful counterattack, but the One Puka Puka 1st Battalion sees it happening, and they instantly, without orders, adjust, go through, through and they flank the Germans from the side, completely crushing them and taking over the entire town.
Nice.
From here, the 34th Infantry Division continues to advance deeper into Europe, and the 442nd alongside them is credited with over 1,100 confirmed kills and capturing 331 German prisoners of war. They then come up on another German defensive line where the Germans have dug themselves in, called Hill 40, which they end up nicknaming Little Casino because of how hard the Germans resisted, and the town of Castanella. 442nd leads the assault on Little Casino because, like it or not, they are now pretty much America's premier fighting force when the situation is running uphill into enemy gunfire and winning anyways. They battle the Germans for 3 days straight and end up taking Hill 140, aka Little Casino, which is ironic because their entire motto is about gambling big and going for broke, and every single time they manage to win.
Oh no! I'm ruined!
From here, the 442nd goes on R&R for a little while, then they get called back in. They are going to go into France, and they are getting detached from the 34th Infantry Division, and they are getting reattached to the 36th Infantry Division out of Texas. They travel 500 miles by foot and rail into France. They link up with the Texans, and they go back into battle. Now, combat from here, the terrain's completely different. They're in the Vosges Mountains. This combat is brutal. They're in heavily wooded forests, and every time they have to take a hill with Germans on top of it, the Germans retreat, run down the hill, run right up another hill, and then they have to fight up the high ground again. It's absolutely miserable.
Yeah.
And the first thing they need to do is they need to take over a town called Broyers, and in order to do that, they have to take over all the hills surrounding the town. There's 4 big ones, A, B, C, and D. The 442nd is in charge of taking over all the hills, while the rest of the 36th Infantry goes in and takes over the town. 442nd goes to work, they do their thing, they run uphill into German machine gun fire, take the hills anyways on A, B, and C. But on D, the Germans are putting up a hell of a fight. This battle goes on for hours. It's just a seesaw battle of they drive up the hill, they get driven back down, they drive up, they get driven back down. It is yard by yard, brutal combat. They're taking heavy casualties. There's finally a lull in the battle. There's not a wave going up. And normally, all the combat they've been experienced to at this time, the Germans have been pretty respectful of the rules of war, right? When you're not launching an attack, you send out the medics go out there, they pick up the casualties, they pick up the dead, they bring them back, they get everybody taken care of. You extend the enemy the same courtesy. That's usually how it's gone at this point. But now the Germans are getting desperate because D-Day has already happened. Shit is hitting the fan, and they are no longer playing by the rules.
Right.
The 442nd doesn't know that, so they send the medics out. The medics go, they lay out the litter, they grab a guy that's been shot, still alive, probably gonna survive. His name's Abe Ohama. They get him on the litter and they start carrying him back, and then the Germans open up on the medics and the wounded with machine gun fire. Abe Ohama, while he was on the litter, was struck again and immediately killed. Seeing this, the rest of the 442nd, unprompted, without orders, pissed off, gets on their feet and charges the hill while screaming, takes the entire hill, killing 50 Germans and capturing another 7 as POWs. The 442nd has just conducted what is very reminiscent of a Japanese bonsai charge, and it's practice that they're gonna need for later. From here, the rest of the 36th Infantry goes in, they take over Broyers, and the 442nd renames Hill D Ohama's Hill.
I mean, when you look at it, right, reasonably so, especially if this is after D-Day, right? This is after the Allies really start to encroach on German territory, right? I mean, that's a move of desperation, especially when you have a situation where this is normally how the rules of war are kind of perceived, and, you know, the courtesies extended to each other, especially being pushed back on 3 out of 4 of the hills. That last hilltop, they have got to be really desperate to defend that. Like, and in hindsight, we do have the understanding of just like, well, yeah, I mean, at this point, they're pretty desperate. And obviously, this is a context to Normandy. I'm sure the African theater down below, they're also pushing up in that as well. Or in Africa, I think African theater is improper term. You know, they're getting desperate. I mean, you think about the German economy at this point as well, how much the Nazi Party had sunk into experimental technology, mismanagement. I'm sure that at this point was I don't know if the Red Army was pushing on them at this point in time, because yeah, I don't know. I don't know where in relation to Nazi Germany pissing off the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union turning and trying to march on Berlin. I don't know where that is in comparison to that, but there were moves of desperation at this point in time, and especially if, you know, in the field, not knowing this, just that's gotta not be a good feeling to suddenly have the rules shift, the rules change, and you would be absolutely pissed.
At this point, the 442nd's been fighting nonstop for weeks on end, so they're finally sent back to the rear for R&R. And the second they get there, it's like 2 a.m. in the morning, they immediately get told there's an emergency, they got to turn back around and head back to the front line. The commander of the 36th Infantry, General Dahlquist, somehow got placed in charge of an entire infantry division and had never actually been in combat. In addition to that, men that served underneath him said he seemed to care more about being the first unit into Germany than he did about actually taking care of his guys and keeping them alive. These factors would culminate and come to a head on October 24th, 1944, when he would order the 1st Battalion of the 141st Infantry Regiment to overextend into German lines, and they would then be engulfed and completely surrounded by an entire German division. To put that into perspective, if you don't know military unit sizes, that's about 300 men surrounded by about 6,000. So while the 442nd is making their way back to the front lines, General Dahlquist orders the 1st and 2nd Battalion of the 141st Infantry to go in and save their buddies. They go, they try fighting, they end up getting pushed back. And here's the kicker. The Germans just think that the Americans are trying to break through the line. They don't know that the Americans are freaking out because there's an entire battalion surrounded. They have no idea that 1st Battalion is up above them on a ridge. But from the American perspective, they think obviously the Germans know that. So they're like, oh shit, we can't punch through the line to go save them. We better start airdropping in ammunition, food, and water so they can stay up on that ridge and fight as long as possible. So they go and try to airdrop a bunch of supplies to them. The airdrop gets caught by the wind and goes off course. And then the Germans are like, wait a minute, why the fuck are the Americans airdropping supplies to us? Oh shit, we have an entire battalion surrounded.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Oh, that's gotta not be a feel-good moment to play your hand and give out that information.
Now they start attacking the Lost Battalion too. The 442nd makes it to the front line on October 28th. Now in hindsight, some of the Nisei feel they were sent in particular because they were deemed expendable, and if they all died, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. However, a lot of the other Nisei like to believe they were sent in because they were the best. So the 442nd goes in and it is absolutely brutal. The Germans have minefields all over the fucking place. They have fortified machine gun positions. So the Lost Battalion's up here. The 442nd has to approach from here. There's the German line in between, and then off to the side is Hill 617 that also has a bunch of Germans on it, overlooking the approach to the German line. So they're just getting machine gun fire and mortars rained down on them from absolutely everywhere. For the first 2 days, the 442nd advances like a couple hundred yards. Every time they peek out from behind a tree or stick their head up out of a foxhole, anytime they leave cover, they're getting shot at. They can't move. They're completely pinned down. After 2 days of being essentially paralyzed on the battlefield, the 442nd, the Nisei decide they're going to live up to their motto, go for broke. They're just going to fucking send it. Here's the plan. They've got 3 battalions. They're going to send one of them up to Hill 617. They're going to take that hill, wipe the Germans off the top of it. Then they're going to come back down the hill, rejoin the other 2 battalions, and then they're going to launch a full-on assault and penetrate the German line and save the Texans. 3rd Battalion gets the order. They're going to launch their attack on Hill 617 first, at which point the 3rd Battalion commander grabs his Colt 45 pistol and says, okay, boys, let's go. Nobody moves. Nobody wants to get out of their foxhole or poke their head out from behind their tree. If they get up, they're going to get shot. This is absolutely crazy. After that, a couple of moments go by, probably the longest couple of moments in human history. It's just dead quiet. Nobody wants to move. And eventually, 2nd Lieutenant Edward Davis, the last officer in his company, stands up and gets on his feet as all the other Nisei are looking at him like he's crazy. And he turns to his highest ranking NCO, Sergeant Kohashi, and asks him, doesn't order him, he asks him, will you go with me? Sergeant Kohashi leaps up onto his feet, screams a battle cry, and starts running up the hill. And all of the other Nisei do the exact same thing as they have a full frontal assault up this hill. Some of the men even sarcastically screamed, bonsai, both making fun of the Japanese that do this and making fun of the situation as a whole, literally being a smartass in the face of death. They take heavy casualties, but within an hour, they've cleared all the Germans off the top of Hill 617. They then split up that battalion and send some of the companies back down to rejoin the other 2 battalions as they begin their assault towards the German line. And those companies that come down from the hill bring the same energy with them, and they launch another bonsai charge straight at the German line. Worth noting, one of the men that was in this charge was Daniel Inouye. Remember the kid we talked about earlier that dropped out of med school to go be part of the 442nd? He is in this charge going in to rescue the Lost Battalion, and as he's charging towards the German line, he gets shot in the chest.
Oh.
But he carries $2 silver in his front breast pocket for good luck, and they literally deflect the bullet and save his life. The 442nd
way.
then proceeds to fight and break through the German line, and what happens next is probably one of the coolest moments in human history. Cutting back to the Lost Battalion, they've been surrounded and fighting for their lives for the past 5 days. They're starving, they're dehydrated, they're low on ammunition, and there's this 19-year-old Texan kid in his defensive perimeter with his gun pointed outward, just waiting for the Germans to come and get him. There's fog, there's smoke, he can't see shit, and off in the distance he sees a silhouette approaching, and it's getting closer, and it's getting closer, but the silhouette's not shooting at him, so he doesn't shoot at them. And as it gets closer, he can start to see the person through the smoke, and it's a Japanese guy in an American uniform, Private First Class Matt Sakamoto. And as he gets closer, he stops, and Matt Sakamoto and this young Texan kid are looking at each other, and this Texas kid's lip starts quivering, and he starts tearing up. He's just had his life saved by this Nisei soldier. And then Matt Sakamoto, in the coolest thing ever, just reaches in his pocket and pulls out a package of Lucky Strike cigarettes, one for himself, and goes, "You want to smoke?" And a couple seconds after that, the rest of the Nisei come walking through the smoke, and they've rescued the Lost Battalion.
Wow.
64 men of the Lost Battalion were killed in combat. 211 of them were saved by the 442nd. To save those men, the 442nd sustained 800 casualties, 120 dead, and 680 wounded. And it is at this point that a rational person that's maybe never served in the military would ask, is that even worth it? Should they have went in there to rescue them if it costs that much? And the answer is unequivocally yes. And it's not because the Nisei were expendable or that they were worth less than the Texans. It's because nobody's expendable. When you join the United States Army, when you become a soldier, they make you say the Soldier's Creed over and over and over again ad nauseum. And in the Soldier's Creed, it says, "I will always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit. I will never leave a fallen comrade." And those aren't just words that they make you say because they sound good. No, it's a promise to the person to the left and the right of you that no matter how bad shit gets, we're going to come to get you because you're one of us. You're not just some number on a spreadsheet that we can plug into a mathematical calculation and determine if you're worth saving or not. No, you're an American soldier and we're coming to fucking get you.
You're goddamn right.
And there's never been a better embodiment of this principle than the 442nd rescuing the Lost Battalion. Because not only did they live up to the ideal of you're one of us, we're coming to get you no matter what, they also, in doing so, proved that they are one of them. The Nisei, the outsiders, the Japanese that nobody can trust, proved irrefutably that they're not Japanese, they're not outsiders, they're just Americans. They're one of us.
I really like the conclusion to that. I actually think that that is one of the coolest things that I've heard. And it makes me sad that it always makes me sad things like this aren't necessarily in the history textbooks that you're taught in school. But I think that in order to appreciate something like this, you have to go through the basic steps. Like, I mean, basic Common Core Idaho education, right? Like basic public school. Yes, we learned about Japanese internment camps. We did learn that, you know, this did happen. We learned basic things about World War II. And that does help in understanding things like that. That helps in building your world understanding. So when you do come across things like this, you have the necessary and required information in context to be able to understand it. Do you think that if that section, chapter 4, came before chapter 1, even as a teaser, do you think it would have landed the same? Do you think not understanding the American civilian sentiment, I guess American sentiment in general, of Japanese Americans at the time, and I guess the Japanese as a whole at the time, do you think lacking that understanding would have made that land less? It shows that, like, regardless of your descent, regardless of factors that aren't even in your control, it's what you do that matters. It's what you say, and it's what you do. It's like it's the tagline that I have. I don't really say it a lot, but it is. Words have power and actions hold weight. Your words, what you say does have power, but also the other half of that is that what you do does hold immense weight. So you can say that, you know what, F it, we're Americans. Okay, but then you prove that you're Americans in feats like this. And I think that's an interesting insight. I hadn't heard anything about this creed personally, which shows my ignorance if I'm being completely honest, and I will 100% take that on the chin. It's also a reason that I know, I've talked about it before, I will not do good in the military. I would not do good in the military because there is that camaraderie. There is that understanding that there is the mission, but there is also others. There is the person next to you. There's the person across from you. There's the person who came before you and will come after you. And I don't have that mentality. I don't have that discipline. I share more in common with your tropey, pop culture assassin in mentality than I do a soldier like this. There's a code here. There is honor here. There is substance here. And I think that is what more people need to focus on and understand. A lot of things in life, as it turns out, in this video this very video as well, is understanding why. Why was this so relevant? Why was there sentiment against Japanese in America, right? Why was the 442nd so influential, instrumental? Asking why solves so many questions. And I love videos like this because it showcases history, and it also showcases, Fat Electrician does showcase this, the answering the whys to many questions as the story progresses. And I think that there's something special about this.
Okay, now, finally, after getting pulled off of R&R almost immediately to go save the day and rescue the lost battalion, they are then finally sent to southern France where they can actually have some R&R. And from November till March, they're on a security detail that's relatively low impact. They get to rest, recuperate, they get their ranks replenished, and this is referred to as the Champagne Campaign. Then in April of 1945, the Allied forces finally make it to the German Gothic Line, their last ditch effort of defenses inside of Italy. It is heavily fortified, and like everything else the Germans made, it's believed to be impenetrable.
That's actually hilarious.
So the Allied forces called up the A-Team. They bring in the 442nd. Nothing has fucking stopped these guys yet. This probably isn't going to stop them either. And because they're the best guys, they're going to get the toughest mission. They are assigned to attack one of the mountain strong points of the entire Gothic line. Literally, the most impenetrable part, that's where the 442nd is going to attack. Now, the reason the chain of command did this is they wanted to use the 442nd as a diversionary attack, right? They're going to have the 442nd attack this super strong point. That way, the Germans are going to send all of their reinforcement troops to this strong point to hold that point, right? And then once all the reserve troops are there fighting the 442nd, because these guys aren't going to give up, and hell, they might win anyways, they're going to be able to attack a weaker part in the Gothic line and punch through. However, nobody told the 442nd that, so the 442nd treats it not as a diversionary attack, but as a main attack, and they punch through the strongest point with reinforcements anyways in a single day.
Plan. It worked.
And during that attack on April 1st, 1945, the main character that's been there all along would finally emerge. Daniel Inouye, the 18-year-old kid that dropped out of medical school and put his dreams of becoming a surgeon on hold to go off and fight for his country. Daniel Inouye, the guy that helped save the lost battalion and had his life saved by $2 silver when he was shot in the chest, had ended up getting promoted in the field to a lieutenant and was now leading an entire platoon. During the attack on the Gothic line, Daniel Inouye's platoon gets pinned down by 3 German machine gun nests with MG-42s, the most terrifying machine gun of World War II. With his entire company pinned down, Daniel decides that he's going to live up to the unit motto of go for broke, and he's going to do some gangster shit. Advancing by himself, he gets shot in the stomach, fights through it, gets to the German machine gun nest, hits it with a grenade, blows it up, immediately shifts to go to the next German machine gun nest, makes it all the way there, throws another grenade in that one, takes out the Germans there as well. He then crawls up.
Dude is quite literally the Call of Duty protagonist. That is wild.
Up to the 3rd German machine gun nest, gets within 10 yards, grabs his grenade, pulls the pin. He's just holding down the spoon, winds back to throw it, and the German inside the nest shoots him with an anti-personnel grenade that hits him directly in the elbow. He was so close that the grenade didn't have time to arm itself, and it is just the blunt force trauma of a massive grenade flying at him that severs the majority of his arm. His men immediately leap up to help him, but he screams at them to stay under cover because he's worried that that arm that he's not in control of anymore is going to relax and let go of the spoon on that grenade and kill him and even more of his men, so he orders them to stay back. In his own words, and I quote, "I looked at my right hand and it was gone. The grenade was still there, clenched in a fist that suddenly wasn't a part of me anymore. I pried it out with my left hand and threw it. That grenade
Wild.
hits its target, and Daniel Inouye has just taken out a third German machine gun nest, both left-handed and single-handedly, literally. He then gets to his feet and continues advancing on the German position, killing at least one more German with his Thompson submachine gun before getting shot in the leg and collapsing to the ground unconscious. He then wakes back up flat on his back, looking up at his men who are looking down at him, and he hits them with the hardest line in military history, and I quote, "Nobody called off the war." Literally telling his dudes, quit worrying about me and assault the fucking objective.
Boys, we're gonna win this fight.
And as if that wasn't gangster enough, Daniel Inouye is then rushed to the rear where he receives emergency medical treatment and has to get his arm amputated in the field completely sober. He had already received too much morphine in the field, they couldn't give him any more without killing him, and they don't have anesthesia on the front lines in World War II, so they just had to cut it off while he was awake. While that's going on, Inouye's men and the rest of the 442nd go on a German ass-kicking extravaganza. Over the course of the next week, they liberate like 5 towns, a concentration camp, they secure key roads, they cut off German supply lines, they're forcing Germans to surrender left and right. The 442nd is advancing so fast that American supply lines can't even keep up, and they're forced to operate on whatever they confiscate from the Germans that they kill or surrender to them. Then on May 2nd, 1945, the German forces inside of Italy surrender. 5 days after that, May 7th, 1945, all of Germany surrenders, and World War II for the 442nd is over.
Right. Because the European theater did end earlier than the Pacific theater. I mean, to be fair, when the Allies really started closing in on Germany, and I understand it as well, when the Red Army actually was closing in from the East. World War II Germany really tried to erase traces of the camps, and I cannot imagine. Like we've seen some of the videos, right? We've seen some of the photos, and I feel that some of that, just in some degree, should be required watching for really anybody, right? That should be part of your core education. This is what happens when certain things go wrong. This is what happens when people decide to be very, very ugly to each other and to dehumanize not just one group, but multiple, right? Because it was individuals who are disabled, unsavory individuals, enemies of the state, certain orientations. It wasn't just one group, right? It was multiple groups of people were sent to these. And they really tried to do what they could to destroy the evidence. I can't imagine pushing in on Nazi Germany and coming across something like Auschwitz or Buchenwald, and many, many others who I don't know the names of. I can't imagine just that horror, especially because like nowadays, right? Like we know, like, yeah, these things happened, right? The Holocaust happened. But to really just be there and to be like the first to see that, I don't think that's something that leaves you. I think that is something that leaves its mark through the rest of your life.
When all was said and done, approximately 18,000 men fought in the 442nd Infantry Regiment. And those 18,000 men were awarded more than 18,000 medals, making them the most decorated unit in U.S. military history for their size and tenure. A few of those medals include 8 Presidential Unit Citations, which is like the Medal of Honor for a military unit, and they earned 5 of them in a single month. 21 Medals of Honor, 29 Distinguished Service Crosses, somewhere between 360 and 600 Silver Stars, 4,000 Bronze Stars, and 9,486 Purple Hearts. And that is the story of the Nisei, the Americans that made up the 442nd Infantry Regiment that had every excuse in the world to hate America and chose to love and fight for it anyways. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over at thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang, out.
What a banger video.
Not only the enemy, but you fought prejudice, and you've won. Keep up that fight, and we'll continue to win. To make this great republic stand for just what its Constitution says it stands for, the welfare of all the people, all the time.
Why does it feel like he's short on breath?
I feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh, Daniel Inouye, the main character. Yeah, so He made a full recovery. He survived World War II. Not only that, he goes back home, and you can't exactly be a surgeon with one hand. So Daniel Inouye gets involved in politics, graduates college, ends up becoming one of the government representatives for the United States territory of Hawaii. He is then instrumental in Hawaii becoming a state, and once Hawaii becomes a state, he then becomes Hawaii's state senator until he passes away in 2012. Now, I realize that I've just glorified a politician, and that's inevitably going to rub somebody the wrong way for some reason, and to be honest, I've intentionally avoided looking at his political career while researching for this video. I genuinely have no idea right now whether that man was a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, something in between. I have no idea. But here's what I do know. Regardless of what his politics were, I have the utmost confidence that that's the type of dude that I want in a leadership position, because at the end of the day, I have absolute confidence that he wants what's best for the country and not what's best for his party, which is extremely hard to find in a politician. So yeah, thanks for watching. I really hope I did that story justice. See you later.
On the day I left to put on the uniform, and so he accompanied me on the streetcar, sitting side by side, and both of us looking straight ahead, and nothing is said until we get close to the destination, when we know that the streetcar is going to stop. He clears his throat and he says, "This country has been good to us. It has given me jobs. It has made it possible for you to go to school. We have lived a good life. We owe a lot to the country. Therefore, if you must give your life, so be it. But whatever you do not dishonor the family, do not dishonor the country." It appears that this was an important part of the Nisei's, as you put it, value system, because I recall very vividly the night before we began our first attack. So that following morning, I sat down and said, "By the way, what were you people thinking about last night? I'm just curious." After a while, one of them popped up and he said, "I was praying that I don't be a coward." And the next one said, "Yeah, I was thinking about the same thing." Everyone said the same thing in different ways. Do not dishonor the family, right? So here, these are the men who work in the plantations, who work in the fields, men who volunteered from the camps, you know, because they were a mixture of Kotonks and us. And every one of them, whether they were in Montana, Wyoming, or Arizona, or Honolulu, came out with the same thing.
Very well said. I think both by that gentleman and I think by Fat Electrician as well. I think there's a greater conversation to be had here about qualifications, about, you know, oh, well, the Anakin Skywalker episode 2, right? Something about, oh, well, they're just politicians, right? I wonder where I get my hatred. It's probably the prequel trilogy, honestly. I thought it was very well done. But that's the one. I think that was done in a very good faith manner. I think that was done in a way where, yeah, I don't care. He doesn't know the affiliation. He doesn't really care about the affiliation, right? At that point, it's you've done things. You clearly have the skill, merit, expertise, knowledge, right? You have all of this. Therefore, as an individual, I trust you far more. And I think that there's certain things that should be required of individuals, right? If you have access to nuclear launch codes, I think it's fair to expect you to know what is caused by that. You know, we're talking the ant walkers of Hiroshima, which those are some horror stories. And if I, as a dingus on the internet, can intake, you know, the horrors of the world and the horrors of war and be able to make educated decisions about things and educated takes on it, I damn well expect anybody in positions of authority to deal with things like that to be able to understand the consequences for those actions. It's why I do my horror binges sometimes. I know it's odd because you'll see, you know, I start going over things like Wendigo and I start going over true crime cases, etc. And it's because it's what my TISM focuses on every now and again, about twice a year. But it's also, the world is not sunshine and roses. People can joke about dropping the sun. You know, heard it a number of times, heard Fat Electrician talk about it. But there's a difference between joking about it and not understanding or being ignorant as to what that is, and understanding that, we can joke about dropping the sun, but to understand like the tap dancing man, right, from the Antwalkers. I won't go into detail, as the tapping was definitely not shoes, let's put it that way. Somebody running through after the blast. To understand the horrors and to understand the peaks of life as well, to kind of have a balanced view on things. And I think that just harkens back to, look, I feel like a boomer some days, right? I feel that if you have skill, if you have merit, if you know what you're talking about, you're clearly well researched and well read. Sure, I thought that's how systems worked. So I feel like definitely some people are going to get weird about it. Some people are going to clap back. I think that this video was done in as good faith as it physically could be. And honestly, I think he did do the story justice. And we need to make sure we're learning from history, so inevitably one day we don't have to repeat the same mistakes. But thank you for watching. I really do appreciate it. I really do appreciate you, Fat Electrician, for having some really challenging my worldviews in a lot of ways, and continuing to make some good videos, especially in a day and age where it's easy and lucrative to just put out AI slop, or to have, ChatGPT tell me the entire history of the 442nd Infantry, because it truly is a lost skill, and is becoming a lost skill to do your research and compile a research paper like this. So I want to thank you personally on that one, and thank you everyone for watching. I really do appreciate it. Hopefully you learned something of value here. Hopefully maybe being frustrated at the beginning, being able to work through this video, maybe you came across something inspirational, or even something life-changing, or maybe you came to your own conclusions that, you yourself have come to. But I appreciate you. I'll see you in the next one.